technically this is Drew's interview.
Okay.
Technically.
Okay. What is your experience surrounding this topic, and why are you informed about this topic?
So for me, AP Government usually, starting in 2016 when I started teaching it, it ends in a public policy unit where we have to like dig through current issues facing the United States and why they're an issue and what policy outcomes we could seek. So from that, you have to study both political parties' perspectives and the structure of our government in the sense of what solutions it could pursue. And so then you run kids through it, and then obviously in understanding political campaigns every 2 years, there's a whole other reason I have to go back and research what people are saying about healthcare and what we could or should do about it. So yeah, it's a cycle where you keep seeing the next version of the solution come through.
What exactly is the definition of universal healthcare?
Why was she there?
It's in political science circles, it's commonly taken to mean that everybody has coverage, and it's often paired with the idea of single payer, meaning that we're not in true universal systems. They're usually not dealing with multiple companies and platforms and options. It's usually a government trying to provide it in an efficient way as a public good. And that's how you get to universal coverage, is just by being present in the country, you're covered.
What are potential drawbacks of universal healthcare?
I think, like with any government program, it's hard to calibrate it right. You run the risk of being, inefficient or maybe not as innovative without some of the benefits of competition. But that, I guess I'm not really asked to overcome that right now. I also think that the initial transition, initial transition can be very bumpy. To go from what we're familiar with and how services are typically routed to a brand new system would be a lot of upheaval right away. And so to sort of either convert or dismantle a structure of private care that's in place would be really complicated.
All right. How realistic is the implementation of universal healthcare?
I guess that depends on context, but I think it's as realistic as the political will in a given moment for it. Because after World War II, most nations committed to it and decided they were going to reboot their nation with some model of universal healthcare. They kind of capitalized on a different moment in history where like rebuilding was the charge everywhere, and rebuilding meant that they got to choose what their priorities would be in that moment. And so coming out of the experience of a world war, and often in the country that was rebuilding, they definitely were not trying to allocate funding the way we do, right? So if a budget is a statement of our priorities in politics, and our priority became the best healthcare in the world, we could do that. But our priorities right now are not that. And so it's not a question of resources. We could definitely afford it. We could probably do it for cheaper than what we're doing right now. But politically, there would be a price to pay for that in terms of interest groups being mad, and the people who profit from this system want to keep it. And those people have a lot of political sway, more than the common person who might, want healthcare redesigned. So yeah, I think that's the thing holding it back, the political will of those elected officials.
How has universal healthcare fared in history across the world?
Well, I guess it depends on how we want to measure it. Any big system like that's going to have some struggles, but when I think about what I know best is the U.S., I think about like lagging life expectancy even pre-COVID. I think about paying more in healthcare expenses per capita for outcomes that aren't better than other places. And so I look at that and go, we're paying more, we're not living longer, we're not getting better stuff for it. Why are we doing it? And so then you can turn around and look at the amount of financial clout that people representing medical interests have in politics, and it's almost laughable the amount of clout that insurance companies in particular have in politics. And so to me, that's like a symptom of something that's wrong with the core of our system. Now in other places, you might hear critiques of the wait time or the quality of care, those kind of things, but sometimes you're really apples to oranges when you compare the US to another place. If you're comparing us to like a very homogenous nation, or a nation much smaller than us, or a nation with less technological savvy, pretty soon some of those comparisons, you're not really controlling for all the variables when you compare. So I think in other nations, the fact that they continue to stick with the universal model, the fact that when we start laying life expectancy and cost and things like it against the US and they come out better, I think that it's in other places exceeding what we're getting here.
Are certain groups of people affected more by a lack of universal health care than others?
Oh, absolutely. It's not like who you might first assume like that's the poorest people in our society, or that's the old people, but actually existing US policy isn't awful in terms of helping the people who need it the most at the fringes. So like Medicare, for example, people will get up in arms about socialism and socialist healthcare, but that's what Medicare is. Everybody pays in and old people get it. And it's one of the most popular programs in our society when they poll, public polling on Medicare. People want to get on it, and people like it when they have it. And that provides that thing you need in old age, right? When you're going to need probably the most care in your life, there's a government program like planning ahead to be there for you. So I think we do it well there. Whether Medicare could be more efficient, sure, but it's established, it's strong, and people like it. And I think on the lower end of things, sometimes it's state governments taking the lead, but there are federal dollars that help. The Medicaid to help people who qualify, right? So we do an okay job with children. In Michigan, there's like My Child health insurance that you can get on if your family situation makes you eligible. And so I think we do okay with those people. The people who struggle in our system that would benefit from universal are really the middle class who are making too much to be helped by Medicaid, but not really getting a good enough deal on health insurance itself to buy good stuff. So they're not wealthy enough to just pay whatever for the coverage. Obamacare tried to some extent to fill that gap and created the exchanges where you can go like have people bid on your health care and stuff and try to drive price down, but that doesn't seem to work great for everybody either. And I know of situations even in my family where the kids are on Medicaid and the parents are in the exchange and they don't all have the same coverage, and it's a complicated mess. So I think that's who we're not serving well. If you expand one or the other, which might be the most workable immediate solution, is to take Medicare and start helping people who are younger and younger with those programs, and then take Medicaid and start helping people who are a little bit better off financially but still hurting when they try to pay for insurance. One of the initial policies that the US could pursue would just be take what we have and start covering more people better with it. And then you have to reallocate resources to pay for that.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the U.S. prioritizing that's stopping them from prioritizing this?
I was being so good in this interview. The United States spends an obscene amount of its discretionary funding on the military.
That's what I thought it was.
They just approved a $768 billion budget for 1 year. The U.S. spends more than the next 13 nations on the military combined. And 12 of those nations are straight up our friends. So it's a choice, right? A budget is a statement of your priorities. And if we need to have troops in all these other countries and all the coolest weapons and newest stuff and, that's what we want to fund, then we can't fund other things because of that. So if you take a look at assessing what some of our competing priorities could cost, it doesn't matter what you want to do. You could pick your cause. You could pick student loan debt, you could pick free college, you could pick universal health care, but that military budget is annual, and it's going to dwarf any of those things. So yeah, I think, again, it goes back to political will. Nobody wants to be the senator or the rep that votes to slash the military budget. It's not a popular thing to do in our culture. So to get the money from there to where we might want to reallocate it, it's going to take some willpower and some people that might not get reelected because they do it. But there's also the American voter that like has heard things about universal health care that might perceive that like we're screwing up by going to it. And you know, you have to have a message that will leave them open to it. You have to get it right when you do it so that that initial experience with it isn't awful. Because then they would be looking at what did we give up to get this, and you know. If you were going to pick like area number 2, if it wasn't military spending, it would be the current system in healthcare that we have really allows a lot of profit taking on literal life-saving care. So if you look at pharmaceuticals and supplies in hospitals and the way that charge masters bill out through hospitals, which is kind of like ambiguous, there's a lot of money that's just going into pockets. And if you could tighten that up, you would have a lot of cost savings as well.
I think that's it. Is that it?
Yeah, one way to cast your paper a little bit, like in a foundational way, is to talk about, I guess potentially like, what are we trying to serve? Who are we trying to serve with government? And if I was writing it from my angle of like, that's what I study, that's what I know, I would try to root some of this in the purpose of government. What is it, and what do we want from it? So if it's going to provide some goods, like you guys get clean air and clean water every day, right? There's a governmental underpinning behind that. There's standards, and we invest money in it. And if you could view healthcare as a public good, should it be something you profit off of or not? And if you're in the business of care that might save a life or prevent an illness, do you really want to mix in the profit motive with that? Is that appropriate? So it's like a philosophical question, but sometimes that will lead you to the root of your argument too.
Okay. Actually, should I ask him the 2 questions that are in my chemistry notes?
I didn't remember you doing that.
We're also interviewing my doctors.
Yeah.
We're gonna ask this to them, but I feel like I could just.
You'll be surprised how sometimes the people in the medical profession have really strong opinions about what to do. That might be really good.
Okay, so this is really. I don't know how to read this. What is hold on. Would some form of universal health care be a more effective way to provide health care to the U.S. population? Like not direct, straightforward U.S. Universal, but like a different form?
Yeah, I mean, you could try to compartmentalize it even. I mean, you could look at age ranges and go, look, 0 to 26, we got you. You're universal. And when you turn 27, here's the plan for you. It's different now. I mean, you could do that and try to, you know, not care for every age group in every situation, but you could start by targeting, hey, these are the young people, we want to take care of them, and you could try to really dial in an effective model for just that segment of the population. You could do the same thing with, you know, Medicare and start with the elderly and work down. It would be like maybe a step, but you're trying to be good at less things at once then, and the scale of it's smaller, so it might make you more effective, more efficient at first to attack it like that.
Okay, and what are some broad inefficiencies in the current healthcare system?
The one that I read the most about that blows my mind is that to a large degree, nobody even knows what the hell you're being billed for. Like, you get a bill, and it could be that you went to Spectrum, and you went to Metro, and you went to Mercy or whatever the other one is, and it's got items on that bill that are different in every case. And so Tylenol is $8 here, but $10 there, and $5 there. But you go to Meijer and get it for $3. So there was this sort of in-depth coverage by Time Magazine a few years back, dealing with the charge master and how they decide those charges. And the hospitals were basically saying, we don't have to tell you. We just don't have to tell you about that. And it was different in every case, and then different rates for different insurance companies. So Medicare pays this for it, but your insurance pays that for that, and mine pays this for that. And a lot of these things adjust quarterly, so like prescriptions for people can change prices in the middle of the year, and sometimes by a lot. The other angle is consolidation is a big problem, where you, by virtue of having less and less hospitals, but also not being single payer, you get it down to where, like, U of M is snapping up hospitals and putting the Block M on them, right? And pretty soon, when there are less hospitals around, you're able to bill whatever you want to bill if you're the main provider of care in a certain area. So, especially in rural areas, that's a big problem. But yeah, I think there's so many things inside of the system today that allow people's care to be exploited for profit. And we don't have recourse. Like, when you go to the hospital, if it's something serious or pressing, you're not going to sit there and talk about, well, what value am I getting for my dollar here when you put my leg back on? Like, that's not how that works. They do the stuff and get to send you a bill later, and you don't know what it's going to be. So I think, like, that even just what that supposes about care is problematic in terms of what our priorities are.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. These are usually pretty good things. Pretty fun to see what people come up with. And
Anything else?
No.
Okay.
yeah, if